In a dark corner of a library in Hobart, Debbie Oakford is researching her genealogy. It's part of an ongoing fascination with her ancestry, which she traces back to her childhood.
I always had a sense of my own natural ability to be in tune with the land. I used to be 3 years old and fall in the creek because I'd be the one that'd go and explore with my brother. But it was when I started asking questions and Mum and Dad probably realised that it was appropriate to tell me, then they came out and said that I was an Aboriginal person, I had Aboriginal ancestry.
Debbie Oakford comes from English, Irish and German stock. Is it more important to you that you're Aboriginal than any of those?
I strongly believe that my identity as an Aboriginal person takes precedence. I think my German and Irish and English ancestry comes a little bit further down the line.
In common with growing numbers of Tasmanians, she claims a special affinity with the land which her forebears have inhabited for generations.
Dad used to say, now you kids be careful out there, there's a snake around. And I'd say, well, how do you know that? And he'd obviously say, well, I can smell it. And which he still can, and I can now too, smell snakes.
People may discover something that indicates to them that it's possible that they've got Aboriginal ancestry. Now, some people might just put that aside and say, well, that's interesting. But for some other people, it's like a conversion. They then convert to being Aboriginal. And along with this comes a lot of notions about spirituality and a special relationship to the land.
Debbie Oakford traces her family tree back to the 1830s. Like others who are seeking to prove they're Indigenous, she has a practiced, almost obsessive attention to detail. Debbie, what is this book?
This is the original record of the entries of the boys into the Queen's Orphan School.
Her devotion to her genealogy is part of a new phenomenon, the willingness to spend hours trawling through state archives and parish records if it'll prove the existence of an Aboriginal ancestor. That ancestor could be 8 generations removed.
There's an entry for a Thomas Thompson. He was aged 4 years of age in 1836.
Yes.
His parents are unknown, but he is entered as a half-caste, and then he was removed to Flinders Island in 1847.
And who was Thomas Thompson?
He was an ancestor of mine.
In 1996, Oakford was elected to the Regional Council of ATSIC, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, which hands out funds to Indigenous organisations. But her claim to be Aboriginal and the claims of 10 other ATSIC candidates were challenged in court. The challenge was backed by the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, led by the high-profile activist Michael Mansell. Mansell wants stringent controls on who can vote in Indigenous elections.
If white people want to run around and say they're Aborigines, or as one person says, they're the keeper of the spirit of the cow pasture meadow tribe, then that's entirely up to them. It's a freedom of speech. But if they want to participate in elections that are set up for Aboriginal people and only for Aboriginal people, then they should be able to satisfy the criteria that they are in fact Aborigines to participate.
The court case was judged on 3 federal guidelines: self-identification as an Aboriginal person, community recognition and family descent. All remain contentious. Oakford lost her case and had to stand down from ATSIC, but Justice Merkel's decision that the case against the other 9 couldn't be proved angered Mansell.
There is something like 300-odd thousand Aboriginal people in Australia. If this decision is left to stand, then the population of Aborigines in Australia could climb to 2 million within 12 months.
That finding...
Several of those who feature in this programme were challenged in court and regard the judgment as a vindication of their claim to be Aboriginal.
Well, that finding of Justice Merkel's has never, ever been appealed or challenged, and stands to this day as far as the Federal Court of Australia is concerned. But then you have the likes of Michael Mansell who don't want to accept that.
Historian Cassandra Pybus says Justice Merkel's ruling didn't help solve the question of Aboriginal identity.
It was very damaging. I could see that he did not want to make a judgment that would in any way impact on people who were stolen from their families and could not, in fact, identify their ancestry. But at the same time, he basically says, you can define yourself as being Aboriginal if you believe it to be true. And I think that has opened the way to, as I say, anybody can call themselves Aboriginal and get away with it.
In fact, during the last 15 years, the number of Tasmanians identifying themselves as Aboriginal has more than doubled to 15,700. This year, a new Indigenous role has been set up. However, just 1,300 have applied to join it. All but 300 have been challenged by others. In a pilot scheme which could be repeated around Australia, a panel has been appointed to consider those challenges. Oakford is one of those who's having to justify her ancestry.
I don't think there's a lot of people out there that are very comfortable with this process. They ask the question why that they should have to go through this process to say who they are.
Debbie Oakford, who's worked for a number of Aboriginal bodies, now thinks all funding for Tasmania's Indigenous groups should be stopped.
I have thought long and hard for a long time, how could it be fixed or a solution came about? How could I get a solution for this? And I thought, well, if there was no funding, there'd be nobody to argue with, no greed, and everybody would live as one happy family.
Hopefully.
Well, yeah.
Black fella, white fella, it doesn't matter what your colour, as long as you're a true fella. As long as you're...
The passionate debate in Tasmania has failed to answer one fundamental question. At what point do families cease to be Aboriginal and become principally European? Is it time to consider another definition of Indigenous identity?
There are many, many, many Aboriginal families over the last 200 years who have ceased to be Aboriginal and now see themselves as European. This process is probably going on all the time and has been going on since the beginning of European settlement. But we still have no real agreement about where that point is, or whether indeed there should be a category that scarcely exists in Australia, and that is people of mixed descent. Now, it seems to me the lack of that category in Australia is one of the things that means this problem will continue as far ahead as I can see.
You can join an online discussion including Cassandra Pybus, Kay McPherson and reporter Quentin McDermott from 9:30 tonight Eastern Time at abc.net.au/4corners.